Yeah, hello everyone. Welcome to Alternative View or simply View. At View, we chat with industry leaders to get to know them and also their opinions and insights on sort of all different sort of aspects of crypto industry. And these views may be popular, unpopular, brand new, or alternative, or anything in between. And I'm your host, Yaoqi from our layer, execution layer on Ethereum for Web3. Today, it's our great pleasure to have our guest, Patrick. Patrick works with Infura these days, but he's also quite famous in the academia. He's teaching a lot of these crypto courses in the universities, and at the same time, his expertise in cryptocurrencies, smart contracts, and also applied crypto. He's sort of like the UK's first PhD graduate student in the cryptocurrencies, and his work has recently appeared in a lot of major conferences. And yeah, again, welcome, Patrick, and really thanks for being with us. And can you also tell us a little bit more of yourself and also what kind of stuff are you working on at the moment?
Yeah, I can give a brief intro, everyone. Thanks for that, by the way. So basically, my journey in cryptocurrency started back in 2013. I was an undergrad at Newcastle University, and I did a cryptography course, and cryptography was really hard because I'm really bad at math. And I remember thinking, I would like to do a cryptography PhD so I can get better at math. And so I met my advisor at the time. He was called Fong Hao, and I was like, "Oh, Fong, I want to do a crypto PhD. Can you help me?" Then he told me about this thing called Bitcoin being used in the dark web, to buy drugs and maybe a cool thing to look at because it's a cryptocurrency. So I looked at it and, there's very little cryptography in it at all. It's just hash functions and signatures, but it was a really cool idea. And that's how I went down the rabbit hole. So from like
Mhm.
2013 to 2016, I was mostly working on Bitcoin. And then around 2016, I moved on to Ethereum because I saw this paper. I was at this conference called Financial Cryptography, and there are these PhD students presenting about the paper's called A Step-by-Step Towards Secure Smart Contracts. And they build this application called rock, paper, scissors as a smart contract, which is actually really hard to do, by the way. I always use rock, paper, scissors as a challenge for students. But after watching that talk, I thought, wow, this is really, really cool. I've been spending 3 years trying to design stuff on Bitcoin and it doesn't work. You're just like punching it in to get it to do anything you want. Where they managed just to go build this within like a day or two. And so that's where I got my first intro to Ethereum. And then generally, like throughout these years, I did research. I was a postdoc for a while at some UK
Mhm.
university, and then I was an assistant professor. Then I left and tried to do a startup, and then that's how I ended up in Infura because they just acquired the software. So throughout
Cool.
this time, I've always had this like large interest in like scalability solutions. So I remember back in 2015 when Joseph Poon came out and
Mhm.
Taj came out with the Lightning Network paper. It
Yes.
was very
Yes.
difficult to read. I don't know if you ever tried to read it. Have you tried to read it, the Lightning Network paper?
Yeah, and after that, there's another one, right? I think around
No
this
problem.
plasma or this some other new
Yeah,
ideas. Yeah.
Joseph described that as aspirational in his writing. But generally, I remember the Lightning paper was a really cool idea, and the first thing I tried to do was summarize it. So I wrote this little paper in 2016 that tried to, actually define how you would do a Lightning channel. So it had a huge interest in like payment channels, and then side chains, and then plasma, and then now rollups exist, and rollups are really exciting. It's sort of the pinnacle of what we've all been trying to achieve for about 6 7 years. So I'm very much so. I guess just to move on to what I'm working on now, because it sort of leads into it quite well. What I tried to do last year was I've been trying to simplify the language and the mental models around L2 or rollup specifically. Because every time I talk to like some teams or individuals, they're always a bit confused about what a rollup's really trying to achieve. And really under the hood, it's just a bridge. You're bridging assets to an off-chain system, and you want to make sure that your funds are safe. That's all a rollup's really trying to achieve. So that was like a big thrust that I was trying to achieve last year, and I've been trying to do it this year as well with some presentations. Um, and I've also been doing these educational courses. So I did this online cryptocurrency class. I think we had about 800 people active at the time when I did it. It's sort of hard to judge. You have all these co-op farmers who was just committed asking for co-ops. But I think after I distilled those, I think we had about up to 800 people, maybe average 300 to 400 people per class. That was really nice. And that was very technically focused about, Ethereum and cryptocurrencies and again, rollups. And generally, I feel like I don't know, I always make this joke that I'm like this private oracle for Infura and teams in the space. People just ask me questions and I try to answer them for them. So I don't know, I like to help other teams out there when I get the chance. So I guess that's what I'm working on right now anyway.
Yeah, super amazing experience. And yeah, as you mentioned, right, you spend a lot of time like researching all different scaling solutions for blockchain space. And in DevCon, you also have sort of 1 hour session to talk about like how to scale Ethereum. Can you share a little bit more about your study around that, like different ways to scale like sort of Ethereum in the past and also the present? Yeah.
Yeah, well, the
It doesn't
scaling.
matter, probably, yeah, not Ethereum or some other like in
Okay.
blockchain
No, yeah. So I mean,
in
I
general.
said
Yeah.
to someone yesterday that generally when I try to do work, I try to do it in a generic way so it applies to most blockchains because I think that's really important. I started in Bitcoin, now I work on Ethereum, but it's a lot of these blockchain systems are very similar, so it's very important to look at it
Yeah.
from a generic perspective and not just how does this opcode work, because then you end up just with technical difficulties of a platform. So the Scaling Ethereum workshop was actually something the EF asked me to do last minute. They sort of just pinged me like the week before, being like, "Oh, Paddy, do you want to run this hour workshop at DevCon about scaling Ethereum?" And I'm like, "Oh, okay, sure, I'll put this together." But generally, like when we think about scalability, I guess there's like 2 to 3 different ways to think about it.
Mhm.
One is can we just crank up the parameters, increase the transaction throughput and just make it really cheap for everyone. That's
Yeah.
the first. Can we just blow it up? The second one is can we shard the network? So the idea is that you have a list of validators and can you split the work across them? So validator A does some work, validator B does some other work, but they don't do the same work, and so you distribute out work. So not everyone's doing the same work; it's distributed. But the problem of both of those approaches is mostly, well, one, TPS is a terrible metric, and anyone who ever takes my class will know that. We should never ever measure a system based on TPS. I hope that's not in your marketing materials, by the way. But the best way to think about scalability are 3 different resources. One's compute. How much computation can be supported by the network. 2, storage. How big do you want the database to get? That database keeps growing, then eventually not a lot of people can hold it. So I think at one stage, an archival Polygon node was growing by 2 megabytes a second. And you can
Whoa.
imagine that, I mean, exactly, it just explodes and eventually doesn't fit on AWS anymore because it's just too big. It's
Hmm.
and 3 is bandwidth, given the peer-to-peer network that you have, how quickly can you send a transaction across the network or a block across the network?
Yeah.
If it takes 10 minutes to get a block across, but you have 13-second block times, well, people are going to start falling behind. So those are the 3 researches you have to care about: compute, storage, and bandwidth. And
Hmm.
alongside that, you need to decide, who do you want to participate in the network? Who can be a block proposer? Who can, transact on the network? Who could download the database? Who could check the database? This entire system, like the entire cryptocurrency field is about, trust but verify. We trust the block proposers to order transactions, but we verify everything they do. And the verification bit is really the bottleneck to scalability. We have to make sure that we have to, artificially constrain the compute, storage, and bandwidth to allow people at home to verify the network in real time. I guess the real bottleneck there. So, just to step back a bit, so the issue is that we can't just increase the parameters because then we kick people off the network. We could try to do sharding, but sharding is sort of the same problem where, eventually it gets too big anyway. And also it's just very difficult to implement. So the third way to scale the network is really to do these off-chain protocols. And it's really again
Hmm.
about could we have a base layer, the settlement layer like Ethereum or another network that holds all the assets? And everyone can check that that system is fine and well and correct and well maintained and decentralized. Then can we move our assets to an off-chain system without having to trust that off-chain system? And that's sort of the goal of the roll-up centric roadmap. I
Yeah.
can move my funds to Arbitrum, but I don't have to trust Arbitrum with my funds. And by doing that, then on Arbitrum, you could, take the first 2 approaches, just scale up the resources because, they have a very different, trust model there. And it can very much be a very heavy duty machine that runs that system. So that's sort of, for me, scalability, just in a nutshell, is all about bridging. We just need to build really good bridges to move our funds
Mhm.
from blockchain A to blockchain B. And that's really at the heart of all scalability. And of course, those three resources.
Yeah, yeah. Totally agree with you, especially when you mention, right, the compute, storage, and also bandwidth. I think it's not just like sort of the limitation for blockchain. I think you can also apply this to the traditional Web2 world. It's just like in crypto, right? We have more decentralized network. And then like on top of this, right, we know that recently there are hot topic around this monolithic and the modular blockchain, right? And also in your talk, you mentioned about that in the early days. We mainly talk about the scaling ways for the monolithic like blockchains, right? As you mentioned, right? Probably we can have better hardware and we can have better like consensus algorithms to process as many transactions as possible. But right now we are sort of like trying to find ways to create these modular blockchains, either like these roll-up ways, like to
Mhm.
do this option computation, and then but we have some settlement on the L1s. But for the past few years, right, we tried all different ways. Why do you think like the current way, like the modular blockchain, is a better way to scale compared to this kind of monolithic way for
I think it's really,
scalability?
I think just alluding to what you're saying, for the monolithic blockchains, we've been trying to scale a one big blockchain for many years. That was sort of at the heart of the block size wars as well back in 2015 with Bitcoin. Should we have a
Mm,
1 megabyte block or a 2 megabyte block or, an 8 gigabyte block or gigablocks? And that was really like the issue there was that we just considered the one blockchain as monolithic, and we have to consider all three resources within that one entity, compute, storage, and bandwidth. And we know that we just can't scale it that way because it just kicks people off the network. It just basically becomes a centralized database because not anyone can validate that is correct. So for the modular approach, I mean, I made this joke during the scaling Ethereum workshop, but I think it's a great way to describe it. All we really did was rebrand those three resources. So if you consider compute becomes an execution layer.
yeah,
How much execution can we do
that's
for
true.
the contracts? Storage becomes a settlement layer. The
Mm,
storage is the database of all the assets, and so that's the storage layer. That's a settlement layer. That is all
mm,
the ultimate truth of who owns what funds. And finally, bandwidth. Bandwidth's the data availability layer. How much data can we send across the network so that everyone receives it in a timely manner? And that's all the network really guarantees, by the way. We don't guarantee historical data is around. We just guarantee that data was published at a certain time and anyone could have got it at that time. But what's nice is by separating it out to, compute the execution layer, storage the settlement layer, and bandwidth the data availability layer, by making these layers, it gives you like a much more focused goal on how to solve the problem. So now we can have, an entire blockchain system, maybe something like Celestia, which is just data availability, and that's the only thing they
mm,
focus on. Settlement layer would be Ethereum, which is my biased opinion anyway, which would be minimal compute, basically enough execution to deal with the bridging, the
mm,
bridge contracts, but otherwise it
mm,
holds all the assets. And then the execution layer are the rollups or these off-chain systems. Even your startup is really focused on the compute layer. Could we launch this, do as much computation as we want, and then eventually settle back.
yeah.
So I think by separating out these three layers, it makes it much easier for us to actually think, wow, we can actually build another system that solves this problem. So I feel like it's actually a really nice mental model to use. So I do like the modular description for how we can solve these problems.
Yeah, as you mentioned, right? So right now we sort of position the traditional like these three pillars, right? The compute, storage, and bandwidth into this execution, settlement, and data availability layer. And apparently, Ethereum right now is positioned as the settlement and the data availability layer for most of these execution layer, or we call rollup solutions, right? And how do you feel about the current rollup space? For example, the optimistic rollups and the ZK rollups. Do you feel like they have achieved sort of some promises we previously saw? And what kind of like drawbacks you feel that they have at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I love and hate them. I don't know. I think there's a love-hate relationship. I mean, if you just step back a bit, looking at the rollup evolution, we had the V1 rollups last year, which was like the ZK sync and the StarkX, and
Yeah.
they only supported payments, transfers, and swaps. Basically a single state transition to guarantee, basically no smart contracts. Says that as long as we did something, we both ended up with a balance at the end. And they worked really well for the most part. DYDX was fairly popular, ZK sync was fairly popular. It sort of solved, a very nice niche there. But the issue was that we need to do more than just payments. If we want to really build, the long-term dream of a roll-up centric rollup, we need to support smart contracts off-chain. And that's what all the V2 rollups are trying to achieve now, to be much more general. So both Optimism and Arbiter basically, it's basically Go Ethereum they're running. It's the full EVM they can support alongside their own additional features. You have the ZK EVMs coming out, or the ZK VMs, which is again just a different crazy experimental machines like Caro. Caro's like a very funky register-based system. It's crazy that something like Ethereum can check the proof and keep that accountable. So now the V2 rollups are coming out and they're trying to be much more general purpose. But I think what I get annoyed about with all these rollups is, I mean, again, there's three problems to consider. So one is, how do we guarantee the data is available? So it's one honest party copying the database. Everyone solves that by posting it to Ethereum. That's fine. That's easy. We solve that problem. The next one's like the state transition integrity. How is the bridge convinced that this off-chain database is correct and well, and all transactions are valid, to protect the funds on the rollup. And again, that's like the fraud proofs versus the validity proofs. That's fine. That's the biggest thing everyone talks about, and that's being solved. What I get really annoyed about is the last, is the censorship resistance. That entire system offline. If all the operators go offline, how do we guarantee we can get our funds out? And that's actually the big difference between a sidechain, we can call it, or a layer 2. So the original sidechain paper in 2014 by Blockstream, it couldn't solve the liveness issue. It couldn't be censorship resistant. If the other system went offline, then all your funds got stuck. And the problem I'm facing now is with a lot of these rollups, they're not going to be censorship resistant from the get-go. Because it's too difficult or too hard, or they're just not ready for it. And so really they're just like vanity projects in that sense. They're just like these vanity side chains that are pretending to be layer 2s. As a community, we need to call them out more on that, because it's ridiculous that they're not building these censorship resistant systems and don't place enough emphasis on it. So I get really annoyed at them when I talk to them. I'm just like, why are you not doing this? This is like the whole point of a rollup, is to guarantee that my funds are safe even if the system goes offline, and many of them won't be when they go live. So that's my biggest problem with them. But otherwise, I do like what they're building. Of course, it's, if I was going to pick one thing that I really get annoyed at, it's that.
Yeah, regarding the sort of the censorship issues, right? Do you think if we have better decentralizations of the sequencers or provers, it can be improved for this kind of issue?
So I think for censorship resistance, and I'll get to the decentralization aspect as well. It really, well, before we go into that, let's talk about here are the agents in a rollup, like who's involved in the protocol. So as you mentioned, we have sequencers, and we have these provers / executors. I'll just call them executors because optimistic rollups don't do any proving. The sequencer is responsible for basically taking users' transactions, ordering them for execution, and then passing them on. It's basically like the front end. If you're going to build like an application, it's the front end. You build this website, it can take all the transactions and then eventually send them to the back end. This back end is either the bridge on Ethereum, or it will send it directly to the executors or the provers. Then the provers will get the transactions, execute them, and then eventually propose an update to the bridge to say, bridge, given these transactions, this is what the database looks like. So so you have the front end component, you have the back end component, sequencer, executor. So in terms of being censorship resistant, or at least protecting users when the system goes offline, the sequencer should have nothing to do with that. It's a front end component. It has absolutely nothing to do whatsoever with the system being censorship resistant. They're just like offering the fast path, a good user experience for people they're willing to serve. In terms of being censorship resistant, what really matters is one, a user can send their transaction directly to the bridge and they can bypass it. So we call that forced inclusion. As long as they can send it directly to the bridge and get it ordered for execution, then we've solved that part. The second part is, we need to get that order transaction executed. So how do we do that? Well, we need one honest executor. As long as there's someone out there willing to pick up the transactions, execute them, and tell the bridge about it, then we get, a censorship resistant system. So what you really need is forced inclusion and one honest executor. And that's very different, by the way, to like a layer one blockchain. Normally you rely on this honest majority of all the validators. Here, we're just relying on one party, to keep the system safe. And that's really important for what it means to be decentralized. It means a sequencer could be, centralized. It could be federated. The sequencer set doesn't have to be that big because it's really just about user experience. It's the executors that have to be decentralized. It needs to be, we need to think of some protocols where it's, it's rate limited. So not everyone can do it because otherwise you get spam, but it's easy enough for an honest party to come along and participate. And so I like to make the joke that what we really end up with is a centralized front end, but this decentralized back end. And that's really the difference between a rollup and something like Coinbase, because Coinbase is also centralized in the back end as well, where now it's decentralized back end, and that's really cool.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. I think there is just another, I don't think it's a corner case because right now it's becoming more and more common. Like there's some native assets on the L2, and then basically once you don't have proper execution on the L2, right, we don't really have the direct channel to bridge these kind of native assets on L2 to L1. Yeah, that's something probably the existing bridging system for the rollup protocols they don't have. Like as you mentioned, right? If some assets we sort of bridge to the L2 via some the L1 contract, and later even the sequencers or executor like sort of down, right? We can still like send the direct transaction on the L1 like Ethereum to sort of exit the assets. But if it's native assets on L2, I don't think right now we have like a lot of channels to exit.
There would be ways to do that. So basically, with the rollups, what they have to guarantee is liveness, so that transactions will always eventually get executed, so that you can take your funds out of a smart contract and then withdraw to the system. So if you deploy like an ERC20 to an L2, you just need to make sure the ERC20 has additional functionality, so that the ERC20 contract can send an L2 to an L1 message to say, okay, I exist in L2. I've never been deployed on the L1 before. Here's a message directly from the L2 to the L1 to deploy my smart contract there. There's lots of like implementation issues around that. For example, it might be a different contract address. Maybe they're not using the deployer and it's like, a different contract address. It's very awkward for NFTs as well, because NFTs are, you'd have to physically burn the NFT on the L2.
That's true.
So there are lots of awkward things around that, but I know there's teams they are working on that because it's a very important problem for them.
I can sense that. Sort of like beyond these general purpose L2s, right? We feel that it can rescale like L1s, for example, Ethereum. Beyond that, sometimes as you also mentioned that we probably have a lot of application, right? Like the front end stuff, right? And then for the applications, right now we have some application specific rollups to solve the scalabilities issues of these applications. And do you think this kind of application specific rollups can be a good way to scale the dApps in the near future? Because like for the past 2 years, right, we saw like X Infinity, DYDX, and some other upcoming games, right? They have millions of users. Definitely, if you put them on general purpose L1, L2, probably they will just congest the network. So that's why they either work on app chain or work on like sort of rollup. But do you think the app rollup can be a better sort of solution for them in the long run?
Yeah, I think there's several reasons why. So I think like if you just think about app specific rollups, they were like one rollups were very, very app specific. ZK Sync only supported payments. StarkX, that's like immutable, so rare, DYDX. They're all app specific, NFT based or trading based. So that was like there's already evidence to say that that does work and that does get popular. I have some normie friends who aren't really in the crypto, but they went on, I think it was they went on Immutable and they bought some fantasy football players. So clearly there's demand for that. I mean, I didn't understand why they did that, but there's demand for it. So I think that's like empirical evidence to say this does work. So the next question is, where does this fit in the wider picture, on at least in my perspective at the moment. For me, this is like the L3 narrative. So the idea is that you have the L2, we can bridge ourselves onto that. And then on the L2 is very general purpose. This could be like Coinbase, for example, uses all your assets are there, you're trading back and forth. But an L3 is really where you deploy another bridge, and then you can move your assets to another system. So for example, if I was an Arbitrum, I could then bridge to another off-chain system that's maybe, run by you guys. You control the sequencer. You have control over the user experience for your users. So I guess actually, let me step back. There's two reasons. One, what's nice about these app-specific rollups is that the company who's running it has control over the user experience. So maybe they just want to support NFTs. That's all they care about. They can run the sequencer. They can own that user experience. And two, they can build their software for that one specific purpose. Now, if they really want to reduce the data cost, if you're doing a rollup, they can optimize the data for that one specific application. The second one is burst traffic. If you're doing like an NFT drop and there's going to be, I don't know, 30,000 transactions within 5 minutes, well, you need to make sure you can handle that amount of traffic within a short period of time by offering a good user experience. But it doesn't necessarily need to hit the blockchain yet. It doesn't need to be settled yet. Settlement could be delayed. We do this with banks already. When I transfer funds to someone, it takes 2 days to get settled. That's fine. They all get batched up and eventually they get settled somewhere else. So yeah, I think there's two good reasons for that. One is owning the user experience, and two is it's handling burst traffic. Because there's been plenty of times in Ethereum where burst traffic sort of broke some protocols, like MakerDAO back in 2020 during Black Thursday, got broken because of all the burst traffic.
Yeah, that's true. Especially for the FT meme, right? Not just on Ethereum, but on all different like high throughput chains. But typically, like FT meme probably, as you mentioned, right, cause like tons of thousand requests and transactions within a few seconds. Definitely will congest a network and also cause some gas war. It definitely affect the user experience like of the other applications. Yeah. And then as you just share, right? So for all the rollups and the different L1s, you always mention like the bridge is a very crucial component for all these different protocols. And I also saw you like did a lot of research around the bridges. And based on your study, what are the issues of the existing bridges?
Yeah. So basically, the way we've scaled cryptocurrencies for the past 10 years is via bridging. We've always been building bridges, but the question is, what type of bridges are we building? And I have to thank Haji for this. I always feel to acknowledge him for it. He helped me work on the terminology for how to describe these bridges. So basically, if you consider Coinbase, when I lock my funds in the Coinbase, that's a bridge. There's a bridge under the hood that holds all the assets. Now, the question is, how is the bridge protecting these assets? What does the bridge have to trust? The bridge is going to, if I've locked in money to the bridge and into Coinbase, how do I get my money back out? And how is the bridge convinced that the money should be released back to me? So we call this, the trust assumption. What's the bridge really trusting? And of course, just to step back a bit, the bridge has all the assets, and this off-chain database, like Coinbase, are the liabilities. And the bridge wants to be guaranteed that the assets can cover its liabilities, because then, it makes sure that the system's fully collateralized. So the bridge wants to be convinced, how can I get my money from Coinbase? So there's three different historical approaches. One is a single authority. Coinbase has the sole authority to tell the bridge how to release the funds. Coinbase will say, Alice can withdraw 1,000 ETH. Coinbase will send this to the bridge, and then the bridge will send 1,000 ETH to Alice. So we're trusting one single authority with those funds. Then it sort of progressed a little bit to a multi-authority, like a multi-sig. Maybe there's 5 out of 9 validators that we have to trust, in order to, protect the funds in the system and allow people to withdraw their funds. Then the third approach is the crypto economic bridges. And this is sort of like Polygon, the proof of stake bridge. But the difference there with the crypto economic bridge is that for me to become a validator, I have to lock up coins, I have skin in the game, and then I elect myself to be a validator. And so if you look at the Polygon bridge, the last stat I had was at late 2021, about 6 entities controlled about 85% of the stake in the system. And I think that was about $1 to $2 billion worth of Matic, by the way. So it's a huge amount of funds there. But again, it's only 6 parties. And so for all 3 type of bridges, we had one party, a multi-sig, and again, basically a multi-sig with skin in the game. And in all cases, we're basically trusting less than 10 people to protect billions of dollars. Now, if I were to tell you that, what would be your first thought? What do you think would be the problem if you trust, 5 people with billions of dollars to protect it? The problem is basically they keep getting hacked. Like Mt. Gox lost 850,000 Bitcoin. That's 6% of all Bitcoin that ever existed, and we sort of pretend that never happened. And for every 2 to 3 weeks, these exchanges just kept getting hacked. And the question is why? Why do they keep getting hacked? Why is it so hard or difficult to protect billions of dollars? And the issue is really that if I'm doing a cryptocurrency startup today, I have to take a set of human processes, implement those human processes, and try my best to protect the private keys and protect the servers. And we know humans don't scale, and humans aren't very good at checking, performing validity checks or auditing or making sure something's done right. We're not very good at that as a species. And so because of that, if you try to take these human processes and, you give the team A, team B, team C, team D, eventually a team's going to fail because they just can't replicate it. Humans don't scale, so we're not very good at doing that. And so that's quite clear. It's not that the humans are at fault. They want to offer good service. They don't want to get hacked, but it's just very difficult for humans to protect billions of dollars. And so, just winding back a bit, the problem of all these bridges for the past 10 years is that it relied on human trust to protect the system. Where now with the rollups and the what I would call the validating bridge, it's software that's protecting the funds. The bridge will not release the money unless it's 100% convinced that this off-chain database is okay and well. And so we know software scales very well. And so we can remove humans from that role of protecting the funds. Then of course we're going to be able to hopefully scale a bit better and have thousands or hundreds of thousands of off-chain systems because we no longer rely on humans. So basically that's what came out of the research. I tried to look at why all these things got hacked, and then eventually you realize, oh crap, it's just because of humans. And it's not their fault, they're just not made for doing this. Oh, I think you're muted. I can't hear you. Uh-oh. Yeah.
It's always the case, right? Human always make mistakes and due to various reasons. And there's just one more thing. As you just mentioned, right? The software we can use, like the rollup, we can use to sort of do some sort of verification before release the funds. But how about the duration between we sort of like see the block generated by the sequencer, and also the proof generated by the prover? There will be a little bit time in between, right? But if this gap is very big, for example, a few days or even a few hours, right? If there are some deals made offline, for example, I transfer you like 1 million USD via bank account, but you also transfer some money to me on a rollup, but probably the sequencer misbehaved, and then the proof is not generated on time. Do you feel like we need some more advanced ways to prevent this kind of stuff? I mean, the instant confirmation and also proof generation. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess there's a few answers to this. Is sort of like empirically speaking, with like these centralized, exchanges, we've always had that we have to trust in the settlement for as long as our funds are on that system. So like this isn't a new problem in that sense. It's been around for like 12, 13 years. You have to trust Binance for actually I'll make the joke about Coinbase because Coinbase not to lock you out of your account, you know, while you're doing this transaction and eventually getting your funds out. So it's not a new problem. So it is always there, which is nice. You know, it's thankfully rollups don't create a new problem around this. They just make it more explicit because we know how the system works.
Yeah.
So with the current rollups, obviously these optimistic rollups take 7 days. I think that's a bit too long. They're a bit too conservative with that number. It could really be a day or two, which is probably way more reasonable. But still training wheels, and they should eventually fix that. The ZK rollups, what's nice is because once you do settle on the blockchain with the proof, the funds could be released immediately. It's just the question is, how long does it take the executors to pick up these transactions, execute them, and produce the proof? And I think the last I saw on Starknet, it was like every 8 hours, maybe. I think it was around every 8 hours they were doing it, because there's sort of this trade-off between the size of the proof and the gas cost, and how many transactions are actually going to settle and who's paying for this. And so the longer they wait, the more transactions they can include in a batch, and they can aggregate the savings for everyone. So I suspect when they get more popular and there's much more throughput or traffic on that, then it should hopefully be a bit more frequent than 8 hours. But the last part I want to mention, and this is why rollups are also very exciting, is that it's because rollups are an open platform where anyone can deploy code and anyone can offer a service. And anyone can also offer a fast withdrawal service, or a quick way to synchronize between different rollups. So that's like Hop protocol, Connects. There's an old startup called Mover, although I think they've pivoted now from doing this. There's several different startups there that are just focused on fast withdrawals, where I have funds on Arbitrum and I want to quickly withdraw back the mainnet. So there's someone on mainnet who's willing to front the funds for me. They'll send me the funds on Ethereum because they know they'll eventually get paid back from Arbitrum, via the bridge. And so it's really exciting now we can have these venture-funded startups that focus on a single problem to make it way better for users to quickly move between chains. And that was never possible before. As I mentioned, it's been a long-standing problem, and now we're actually getting better solutions for it because people are willing to take on that risk in order to earn profit. And it's it's a sense. So it's great to see a market actually evolve around this and hopefully solve that problem.
Yeah, basically, I think they are running their own executors or verification, and then probably they have more confidence and collaborate with some liquidity providers to provide this fast withdrawal for the users. Yeah, and sort of like we come to the last question. As you know, right, we are doing these alternative views. Do you have any sort of non-mainstream advice you want to leave to our audience? Yeah.
Non-mainstream advice. I mean, I'm gonna jump in my comment here. So a lot of Ethereum people, this is not cryptocurrency people in general, they love to hate on Binance Smart Chain. They love to hate on it. They're like, oh, this is a fully centralized system. How dare they only have 8 validators? But actually, I think Binance are very ballsy for doing that. If you look at Binance Smart Chain, it's basically, it's like working towards the goal of a rollup. They've taken their centralized exchange, basically tried to convert it into a network. It's an open network where anyone could deploy code there, give or take. Maybe the validator will ignore it, but it's a fully auditable system. There's proof of reserves. I know my funds are in the system. If they get hacked, which happened recently, by the way, if you remember, with I forget how much they lost, but there was this minting issue with the bridge due to Merkle trees. But the moment they do get hacked is obviously anyone that they lost funds. And so actually Binance Smart Chain is pretty cool because it does have proof of reserves. It does have the smart contract system that we can all deploy on. And the only thing the validators can do is go offline. And I guess they could also try to fork the network, but they could go offline and freeze the funds. So it's basically a sidechain, which is fine. Most of these systems are sidechains anyway, and so it's really cool. Binance Smart Chain actually went and did this and sort of provided this nice empirical evidence that something like this has product market fit. It's useful and people like it, and people will go on it to trade because it's much more crypto native than using a centralized exchange. So that's probably my non-mainstream advice, or I don't know, view at the moment. I think most people hate on Binance Smart Chain, but I think it's really cool and it's sort of a step in the right direction of how I'd like to see rollups evolve and emerge. So yeah, that's probably, I don't know, probably not expected. So I'm very happy with that.
Yeah, it's a great opinion. I mean, alternative opinion. Yeah. And yes, thanks a lot for Patrick sharing a lot of like interesting insights and talking about like scalability, L2s, rollups, and also bridges, right? And yeah, and also a great thanks to all the audience who listened to our overview. And our view, right, as I just mentioned, right, we are talking to a lot of experts in the industry around like L2's scalabilities. And if you want to listen to more, just subscribe to our channel. And yeah, we are signing off to the next time. Yeah, thanks everyone.